1 year had passed since the humans began their quiet departure. The first signs of trouble appeared like small cracks in a great wall. Nobody noticed them at first because they seemed so minor: a delayed shipment here, a missed appointment there. Equipment that ran a little less efficiently than before. Counselor Thyron stood in the empty control room of Crystal Mine 7 on Kepler 442b. The massive facility had been operating at reduced capacity for 6 months. The deep shaft operations that required human expertise had been shut down completely, leaving millions of credits worth of equipment sitting idle. "Where is Supervisor Kyung-ho Jin?" Thyron asked his assistant manager. His replacement team was supposed to arrive 3 weeks ago. The Vorthek manager's crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. "We have received no communication from the Human Labor Office." The last message stated that Supervisor Jin had completed his contract and returned to Earth for reassignment. Thyron looked at the sophisticated mining equipment that sat silent and useless. The Vorthak had designed these machines to be operated by their own people, but the deep caves were too dangerous for crystalline beings. One wrong move, and their entire body structure could shatter. The humans had been willing to take those risks. Kyung-ho Jin had worked 16-hour shifts in toxic conditions that would have killed most aliens. He had somehow learned to read the subtle signs of geological instability that the most advanced Vorthek sensors could not detect. His intuitive understanding of underground structures had kept the mines running safely for 5 years now. The mines were closing. The Vorthek engineers could operate the surface equipment, but they could not navigate the complex cave systems that Kyung-ho had mapped by hand. The most profitable sections of the mine were now unreachable. Similar problems were appearing across Altari space. Their agricultural colonies was struggling to maintain food production. The human farmers who had worked their most challenging worlds were gone, replaced by Altari technicians who followed proper procedures but achieved poor results. Jin Sha had been particularly gifted at making plants grow in hostile environments. Her techniques seemed to violate the logical principles that guided Altari science, but somehow they worked. She could make crops flourish in soil that should have been completely barren. "The mineral content is identical to Supervisor Cha's test plots," reported agricultural specialist Velanara. "The irrigation patterns match her specifications exactly. The atmospheric conditions are within acceptable parameters, but the plants continue to fail." Director Taisa studied the withered crops with growing frustration. "Then what factor are we missing? There must be some element of her process that was not properly documented, but there was no missing factor. The difference was Yujin herself. She had possessed an intuitive understanding of plant biology that could not be taught or replicated. She could sense changes in soil chemistry that required immediate adjustment. She could read the subtle signs of plant stress that preceded crop failure by weeks. The Altari could follow her written procedures, but they could not think like her. They could not feel what the plants needed. They could not make the creative leaps that turned marginal farmland into productive agriculture. The crisis was worst in Nebulan space. Their gas mining operations had come to a complete halt. The humans who had operated the deep atmospheric extraction equipment were gone, and no Nebulan could replace them. Commander Veltar floated in his docked warship, watching the fuel gauges drop toward empty. His fleet had been stranded for 3 months waiting for replacement gas shipments that never came. The Nebulan homeworld was rationing fuel to essential services only. Status report, he demanded from his engineering officer. "All ships remain grounded, Commander," the officer replied. "The atmospheric mining platforms cannot reach the deep pressure zones where the high-grade fuel is found. Only human operators could survive the extreme conditions." Veltar had watched human engineers work in the crushing depths of gas giant atmospheres. Their compact bodies and remarkable adaptability allowed them to function in environments that would have destroyed Nebulan equipment. The extraction process had been designed around human capabilities from the beginning. Engineer Minseok Park had been the best of them all. He could work for hours in atmospheric pressure that would have compressed a Nebulan into a small cloud of particles. His understanding of gas dynamics was intuitive rather than mathematical, but his results were always perfect. Now the extraction platform sat empty. The Nebulan could not modify the equipment quickly enough to work without human operators. Their civilization was slowly grinding to a halt as their fuel supplies dwindled, but the most serious crisis was the breakdown of galactic security for decades. Human military units had patrolled the dangerous regions of space, fighting pirates and protecting trade routes. The major alien civilizations had grown so dependent on this protection that they had allowed their own military capabilities to decline. The first major pirate attack struck a Vorthak convoy in the Outer Rim. The raiders overwhelmed the merchant ships with tactics that seemed impossible for their primitive minds to conceive. The cargo of rare crystals was lost, and the Vorthak response fleet arrived too late to help. How did they coordinate such a complex assault? Demanded Admiral Kekstara as she studied the attack reports. These pirates have never shown this level of tactical sophistication before. The answer was disturbing. The pirates were using strategies they had learned from watching human military operations. For 50 years they had observed human rapid response teams in action. Now they were applying those lessons against the very civilizations the humans had once protected. Captain Haunem sat in a small cafe on the Vorthak homeworld, listening to the conversations around her. She was one of the last humans in alien space, part of the final observation teams that monitored the situation before complete evacuation. "The lower levels are flooded," whispered one Vorthak engineer to another, "without human structural specialists. We cannot maintain the support systems. The entire mine complex may collapse." Hound sipped her synthetic coffee and pretended to read her datapad. Her reports were being transmitted to the human fleet commanders, helping them understand the full impact of their departure. The aliens were finally learning what they had lost, but the lesson was coming too late. The economic damage was spreading throughout the galaxy. The Nebulan gas trade had collapsed, stranding their fleets and cutting off their main source of income. The Altari agricultural colonies were facing widespread famine as their food production systems failed. The Vorthak mining operations were shutting down, destroying billions of credits worth of infrastructure. But worse than the economic crisis was the breakdown of cooperation between species. Without human mediators, the alien civilizations were returning to their old patterns of suspicion and conflict. They had forgotten how to work together, the Altari blamed the Vorthak for hoarding crystal resources. The Vorthak accused the Nebulan of sabotaging their mining operations. The Nebulan claimed that both species were conspiring against them. The trust that had held the galactic community together for centuries was crumbling. Emergency council sessions were called almost daily, but nothing was accomplished. The alien representatives argued in circles while their civilizations fell apart. They had no experience solving problems without human creativity to guide them. "We must find alternative solutions," insisted Councillor Zafira during one heated debate. "Our people are suffering while we waste time with pointless discussions." "Easy to say," replied Councillor Thyron, "but what alternatives exist? We built our entire infrastructure around human capabilities. We cannot simply replace 50 years of integrated systems overnight." The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The aliens had not been the advanced civilizations guiding primitive humans toward enlightenment. They had been dependent children being cared for by patient adults. Now, the adults were gone, and the children did not know how to take care of themselves. Some aliens began to suspect that the human departure had been planned. For years, the efficiency of the exodus and the completeness of the evacuation suggested careful preparation, but this possibility was even more disturbing than a spontaneous departure. If the humans had been planning to leave, it meant they had been working alongside the aliens while secretly preparing their escape. It meant they had smiled and cooperated while harboring deep resentment. It meant the aliens had completely misjudged the species they had taken for granted. As the second year of crisis began, the galactic community faced a terrible reality. Their civilization was falling apart, and the species they had dismissed as primitive servants had been its foundation. The humans were gone, and they were never coming back. The age of alien superiority was ending, and the galaxy was paying the price for 50 years of arrogance. 2 years after the Galactic Preservation Act, the council chambers had become a place of desperate panic instead of dignified debate. The representatives who had once spoken with calm authority now shouted accusations at each other while their civilizations crumbled around them. Councillor Veltar slammed his mechanical appendage against the speaker platform, making a sound like thunder in the great hall. His gas form swirled with agitation as he addressed the assembly. The Epsilon sector is completely lost to us, he announced. Pirate fleets control 15 star systems, and our security forces cannot stop them. We need immediate military assistance, or we will lose everything. The other council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had all become dependent on human military protection, but none wanted to admit how helpless they had become. The Altari had tried to retrain their own soldiers, but logical minds could not adapt to the chaos of real combat. The Vorthak had built impressive war machines, but they lacked the tactical flexibility that human commanders had provided. High Admiral Kexthora rose from her seat. Her blue skin had turned pale gray with stress over the past months. We have searched every system in known space for human vessels, she reported. Our long-range sensors have found no trace of their ships or colonies. They have vanished as completely as if they never existed. The search for humanity had consumed vast resources and achieved nothing. Survey fleets had followed every shipping record and communication log, but the humans had left no trail. They had planned their disappearance with the same efficiency they had shown in everything else. Dr. Jeho Kong sat in a corner cafe on the Vorthak homeworld, listening to the conversations around him. He was one of the few humans still working in alien territory, part of the final observation teams that would monitor the situation until the last moment. The deep mining operations have failed completely, whispered one Vorthak engineer to another. Without human expertise, we cannot prevent the cave systems from flooding. The lower levels are already lost and the water is rising to the main shafts. Jeho pretended to read his datapad while recording every word. The information would be transmitted to the human fleet commanders who were following the collapse of galactic civilization from their new homes beyond the rim. His reports helped them understand the full impact of their departure. The economic crisis had become a catastrophe. The Nebulan gas trade was completely dead, leaving their fleets stranded and their people facing energy shortages. The Altari agricultural colonies were experiencing widespread famine. As their food production systems failed without human maintenance, the Vorthak crystal mines were flooding, destroying machinery worth billions of credits. But the worst problem was the breakdown of cooperation between species without human mediators. The alien civilizations had returned to their ancient patterns of suspicion and distrust. They blamed each other for the crisis instead of working together to solve it. Ambassador Tissa of the Altari met secretly with her Vorthak counterpart Zexther in a neutral space station. The meeting was supposed to be confidential, but everyone knew about it. The alien governments were becoming desperate enough to try anything. We must find the humans, Tissa insisted. They are the only ones who can restore order to this chaos. Our civilizations are dying without them. If they can be found, Zexther replied. Our deep space monitoring stations detected massive energy signatures moving toward the galactic rim 2 years ago, but the readings were too distorted to identify the source. The possibility that humanity had left the galaxy entirely was almost too terrible to consider. If the humans had truly departed for unknown space, they might never return. The aliens would be left to solve their problems without the species they had come to depend on for everything. Dr. Minji worked in her laboratory on a joint research station, watching her alien colleagues struggle with problems that had once seemed simple. The Altari scientists had impressive computational abilities, but they could not think outside their logical frameworks. The Vorthak researchers could process vast amounts of data, but they lacked the creative insights that led to breakthrough discoveries. Perhaps we should try alternative approaches, suggested Dr. Velinara, an Altari researcher who had worked closely with human scientists for years. The humans often used methods that seemed irrational but produced unexpected results, but when the aliens tried to copy human problem-solving techniques, they failed miserably. Human creativity was not just about using different methods. It was about seeing problems from completely different perspectives. The aliens had spent so long dismissing human thinking as primitive that they had never learned to understand it. The Council authorized increasingly desperate measures to locate humanity. They broadcast messages throughout the galaxy offering generous terms for human return. They promised better working conditions, improved compensation, and even representation in the Council itself. We acknowledge that mistakes were made in our past relationship with humanity. Read the official council statement. We are prepared to offer full partnership status and equal voting rights in exchange for their return to galactic civilization, but the messages went unanswered. The communication networks that had once carried human voices now transmitted only silence. The few humans still working in alien territory claimed they had no authority to speak for their people. They were just civilian contractors completing their assigned tasks. Some council members began to suspect that the human departure had been planned from the very beginning. The efficiency of their exodus, the completeness of their disappearance, and the precision of their timing suggested years of careful preparation. They played us for fools, admitted Counselor Thyron during a closed council session. While we treated them as servants, they were planning their escape. They smiled and cooperated while secretly preparing to abandon us. The implication was devastating. If the humans had been planning to leave, it meant they had never intended to be part of galactic civilization. They had used their time among the aliens to learn and prepare while waiting for the right moment to depart. Intelligence reports began to reveal the scope of human deception. The cargo ships that had seemed so normal were actually colony vessels in disguise. The mining operations had been cover for massive resource gathering. The research projects had been ways to acquire advanced technology and knowledge. They took everything, reported Intelligence Director Velmara. Technical specifications advanced. Research data, industrial equipment, even biological samples. They have stolen 50 years of our scientific progress. But it was not theft the humans had earned access to. That information, through their work and service, they had been given technology and knowledge as payment for their contributions. The aliens were angry because they had never expected humanity to use those gifts to become independent. The search operations expanded beyond the galaxy's borders. Deep space probes were launched toward nearby galaxies, following the faint energy signatures that might have been human ships. The missions were expensive and dangerous, but the Council was running out of options. We are committing significant resources to these deep space missions, warned Treasury Director Kekstana. Our reserves are already depleted from the economic crisis. We cannot maintain this level of spending much longer. But the alternative was admitting defeat. The alien civilizations had built their entire way of life around human labor and expertise. Without humans, they were facing the collapse of everything they had achieved. As the third year of crisis began, the Council faced a terrible truth. The galaxy was falling apart, and the beings they had dismissed as primitive servants had been its true foundation. The humans were gone, and they might never return. The search continued, but hope was fading. Every day brought new reports of system failures, industrial collapses, and security breaches. The once mighty galactic civilization was crumbling into chaos, and there was nothing the aliens could do to stop it. They had watched humanity leave quietly, and now they were learning the true cost of their arrogance. The species they had treated as expendable had been irreplaceable. 10 years had passed since the Galactic Preservation Act, and the galaxy was unrecognizable. The great civilizations that had once ruled the stars were now scattered survivors living in the ruins of their former glory. The council chambers had been abandoned years ago because there was no longer a government to govern or a civilization to lead. Counselor Zephyr sat alone in her small quarters on what remained of a Altari refugee station. She no longer had an office or a title or any real authority. The transmission device in front of her displayed a message that had arrived that morning, the first communication from humanity in 10 years to the former members of the Galactic Council. The message began. The voice belonged to Admiral Unji-Kwan, commander of the human colonial fleet. We hope this message finds you in good health. We have been monitoring your situation from our new home in the Andromeda Galaxy. We are aware of the difficulties you have been facing. Zephyra hands shook as she read the translated text. The humans had not just survived their exile. They had thrived beyond anything the aliens had thought possible. They had traveled to another galaxy entirely and built a new civilization from nothing. We have established successful colonies on 47 worlds, Admiral Kwan continued. Our population has grown to over 12 billion, and our technology has advanced considerably. We have made contact with several indigenous species in this galaxy, and we are pleased to report that our relations are based on mutual respect and equality, the contrast was deliberate and devastating. While the aliens had been struggling to survive in their failing civilization, the humans had been building something far better. They had found new alien species who valued their contributions instead of taking them for granted. Counselor Theron received a similar message in his crystal shelter on a dead Vorthic mining world. His form flickered weakly as he processed the information. The humans had discovered crystalline beings in their new galaxy, beings who worked with them as partners instead of treating them as primitive servants. "We have learned much from our new neighbors," the message explained. "The Andromedans have taught us advanced techniques for energy manipulation and faster-than-light travel. In return, we have shared our knowledge of terraforming and biological adaptation. It is a true partnership based on mutual benefit and respect." The implications were staggering. The humans had not only replaced the alien species they had left behind, they had found better partners. The Andromedans apparently valued human creativity and adaptability in ways that the Galactic Council never had. Captain Veltana read the message from her refugee camp on a barren asteroid. She had lost her ship, her crew, and her livelihood when the Nebulan civilization collapsed. The humans had apparently discovered gas giant civilizations in their new galaxy, beings who worked with them to develop amazing new technologies instead of just exploiting their labor. "We have not forgotten our time in your galaxy." Admiral Ken's message continued. "We learned valuable lessons about resilience, adaptation, and the importance of standing together in the face of adversity. We are grateful for those lessons, even though the circumstances were often difficult." The diplomatic language could not hide the underlying truth. The humans had become stronger because of their suffering. The exile that was supposed to be their punishment had become their salvation, while the aliens' comfort had made them weak. But the most shocking part of the message came at the end. The humans were offering humanitarian aid to the species that had once oppressed them. Medical supplies, food shipments, and technical assistance were available for any civilization that requested help. "We believe that all sentient beings deserve dignity and respect," Admiral Kwan concluded. "Our experiences in your galaxy taught us the importance of treating others as equals regardless of their origin or capabilities. We hope that our assistance can help you rebuild your civilization on a foundation of mutual respect and cooperation." The message ended with coordinates for communication and a promise that human aid ships would arrive within 6 months if requested. It was signed by the United Human Colonies Council, representing the democratic government that humanity had established in their new home. The alien leaders faced an impossible choice. They could accept human aid and admit that they had been completely wrong about everything, or they could refuse help and watch their civilizations die. Either way, they would be acknowledging that the species they had dismissed as primitive had, sir. 3 months had passed since the Galactic Council voted to limit human expansion. The Preservation Act was now law, and every species in the galaxy had to follow its rules. Every species except the ones who made the rules. Of course, the major alien civilizations had given themselves generous quotas, while humanity received barely enough resources to survive. Counselor Zafira sat in her office, reviewing the daily shipping reports. Something seemed different about the human cargo movements, but she could not put her finger on what exactly had changed. The numbers looked normal, but there was a pattern she did not recognize. The report showed that human shipping traffic had decreased by 30% over the past month. When she called for an explanation, the human trade representative, Dongyun Choi, gave her a simple answer. "We are improving our efficiency," he said with a polite smile. "New routing systems allow us to move the same amount of cargo with fewer ships. It saves fuel and reduces wear on our vessels." Zafira nodded and filed the report away. The explanation made sense. Humans were always finding new ways to do things more efficiently. It was one of their few useful traits. She did not think about it again, but Dong Yun was lying. The truth was far more complex and carefully planned. The reduction in shipping was not about efficiency. It was about preparation. Every human ship that disappeared from normal trade routes was actually heading to secret staging areas beyond the galaxy's edge. Captain Minhee Han stood on the bridge of the cargo vessel, Bright Future, watching as another group of ships joined their growing fleet. The vessel looked like a normal freight hauler from the outside, but hidden compartments held supplies for thousands of people. The ship's true purpose was known only to a select few. Status report, she said to her first officer. All departments report ready, Captain. Lieutenant Kyungmin Lee replied. We have food for 6 months' water. Recycling systems are operating at full capacity and the hidden passenger compartments are prepared for occupancy. Min-hee nodded. The Bright Future was one of hundreds of ships that had been secretly modified over the past 5 years. While the aliens thought humans were just hauling cargo, these vessels had been transformed into colony ships. Each one could carry entire families to their new homes beyond the stars. The plan had been in development since the first year of human membership. In the Galactic Council, it became clear very quickly that the aliens would never accept humanity as equals. They saw humans as useful servants, nothing more. The Preservation Act was just the final insult that triggered the execution of a plan years in the making. On the mining station Kepler 7, Sungmin Han received his coded message through the standard communication channels. To anyone monitoring the transmission, it looked like a routine work assignment, but Sungmin knew how to read between the lines. The message told him exactly what he needed to know. Pack everything, the message said. Extraction in 24 hours. Sungmin had been working on this station for 3 years, managing the dangerous operations that the Vorthak owners were too afraid to handle himself. The crystalline beings paid well, but they treated him like a piece of equipment. Something useful but replaceable. He looked around the control room that had been his workplace for so long. The mining equipment hummed quietly as it pulled rare minerals from the asteroid's core. It was good equipment, well maintained and profitable, but after tomorrow it would be the Vorthak's problem. Agan Sungmin began his final shift with the same dedication he had always shown. He updated all the maintenance logs, checked every system twice, and left detailed instructions for whoever would replace him. The Vorthak might think humans were primitive, but they had never learned to be careless with their work across the galaxy. Similar scenes were playing out in thousands of locations. Human workers were quietly finishing their assignments and preparing to leave. Their alien employers noticed nothing unusual. Humans had always been reliable and professional right up until the moment they vanished. Dr. Naeong Park worked late in her laboratory on the Nebulan Research Station. She had spent 2 years developing new atmospheric processing techniques that would allow the gas beings to harvest resources from previously unreachable zones. The work was groundbreaking and would have made her famous in academic circles, but fame in a galaxy that would never respect her meant nothing. Naeong carefully copied all her research data onto portable storage devices. The aliens could have her discoveries, but they would have to figure out how to use them without her working late again. Dr. Park, said her Nebulan colleague as he drifted past her lab. Just finishing up some documentation, she replied without looking up from her work. I want to make sure everything is properly recorded. The Nebulan made a sound that might have been approval and continued down the corridor. He had no idea that he was looking at those research notes for the last time. By tomorrow, Dr. Park would be gone, and with her would go years of irreplaceable experience and insight. The evacuation was happening in phases. First, the families with children, then the elderly and disabled, finally the workers who were keeping essential systems running. Until the last possible moment, each group had specific rendezvous points and departure times. The coordination required was enormous, but humans had always been good at organizing complex operations. A and Lim commanded one of the deception teams. Their job was to stay behind and maintain the illusion that everything was normal. His crew of 50 volunteers would continue working at their posts until the last evacuation ships were safely away. Only then would they join the exodus. Remember, Jayan told his team, we are buying time for our families. Act normal, work hard, be friendly. Do not give the aliens any reason to suspect what is happening. His people nodded. They understood the importance of their mission. If the aliens realized what was happening too early, they might try to stop the evacuation. The deception teams were the shield that protected the escape. Dr. Suyang Kim worked her final shift at the Refugee Medical Center on Altara Prime. She had been treating alien civilians for 4 years, providing medical care that their own doctors could not match. Human physicians had a reputation for being able to treat conditions that baffled other species. She spent extra time with each patient that day, making sure they had everything they needed. Her replacement would not arrive for another week, and she wanted to leave detailed care instructions for the most serious cases. "You seem different today," doctor said one of her Altari patients. "More focused somehow." "I am just being thorough," Suyang replied as she checked the patient's readings. "I want to make sure you have the best possible care." The patient smiled, the first genuine smile she had ever seen from an Altari. "You humans are so dedicated to your work. We are fortunate to have you." Suyang felt a pang of sadness. The individual aliens were not evil. They were just trapped in a system that valued hierarchy over justice. She wished things could have been different, but they were not different, and wishing would not change anything. By tomorrow, she would be on a ship heading for unknown space, leaving behind a galaxy that had never appreciated what humanity offered. The exodus was not driven by anger or revenge. It was driven by hope, the hope that somewhere among the stars there was a place where humans could build something better, where they could be partners instead of servants, where their children could grow up with dignity and respect. As the evacuation ships gathered at the edge of known space, Captain Min Hee-han looked back at the galaxy that had been humanity's home for 50 years. It was beautiful from this distance. The swirling arms of stars and nebulae looked peaceful and welcoming, but appearances could be deceiving. The galaxy was not peaceful for those who were different. It was not welcoming to those who challenged the established order. It was a place where might made right and age made authority. Humanity was young and small, and that meant they would always be at the bottom. Min-hee turned away from the viewport and faced forward toward the unknown. Their real journey was just beginning. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched higher than any building on Earth. The walls were made of living crystal that glowed with soft blue light. Thousands of alien beings floated, hovered, or stood in their designated areas. Each species had its own special section designed for their unique needs. The air hummed with the sound of translators, working to turn alien speech into words that other species could understand. In the center of this massive hall stood a single human figure. Ji-won Park wore the simple dark blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. His hands were steady, but his heart raced as he looked up at the towering alien forms surrounding him. Some of the creatures were so large they needed special platforms to keep from crushing smaller beings. Others were so small they lived in protective bubbles filled with their home atmosphere. The Altari representatives looked down at Ji-won with expressions of barely hidden disgust. Their blue skin was pale and smooth, like polished stone. Their large black eyes never blinked as they studied the human ambassador. They whispered among themselves in their musical language, and Ji-won didn't need a translator to know. They were not saying nice things to his left. The Vorthek delegation sparkled and chimed like living jewels. Their crystalline bodies were beautiful but cold. Each one was unique in shape and color, but they all shared the same sense of superiority that radiated from their forms. They had been around for millions of years, and they never let younger species forget it. Nebulan were the strangest of all. They existed as clouds of gas contained in mechanical suits that allowed them to interact with solid matter. Their voices came from speakers built into their containment systems and always sounded electronic and distant. They floated above the other delegates like colorful storm clouds. Ji-won cleared his throat and began to speak. His voice was amplified throughout the hall, but it sounded so small compared to the deep rumbles and musical tones of the alien voices. "Honored council members," he began, "I come before you today representing the people of Earth. We seek only a place among the stars, a chance to contribute to the great community of intelligent life that you have built." The hall erupted in what could only be described as alien laughter. The Altari made sounds like wind chimes in a storm. The Vorthek rang like cracked bells. The Nebulan produced static that might have been amusement. High Counselor Zafira of the Altari rose from her seat. Her voice was beautiful but cold, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. "Human representative," she said, "your species has existed for barely 200,000 years. We have traveled between stars for longer than your entire evolutionary history. What could you possibly offer to civilizations such as ours?" Ji-won had prepared for this question. He had studied the galaxy's history and knew that many species had been accepted into the Council with far less to offer than humanity. "We offer our willingness to learn," he said, "our adaptability, our ability to survive in conditions that other species find impossible. We have thrived on a world that most of you would consider uninhabitable. Exactly, rumbled Counselor Thyron of the Vorthek. His crystalline form shifted colors as he spoke. You come from a primitive world, and you are primitive beings. Your technology is crude, your society is violent, your emotions make you unpredictable and dangerous, the other delegates murmured in agreement. Jiwan felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his voice steady. We may be young, but we are not violent by nature. We have ended wars on our own planet. We have learned to work together despite our differences. Have you asked Counselor Veltar of the Nebulan? Our scouts report that your planet still has weapons capable of destroying all life. Your people still fight over resources and territory you have poisoned your own atmosphere and made large parts of your world uninhabitable. Jiwan wanted to argue, but he knew they were right about some things. Humanity had made mistakes. Earth was not perfect, but they had also accomplished incredible things in a very short time. They had gone from primitive tribes to space travel in just a few thousand years. We have made mistakes, he admitted. But we have also learned from them. We have the ability to change, to grow, to become better than we were. We ask only for the chance to prove ourselves. The council members exchanged glances, or whatever passed for glances, among their species. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, High Counselor Zephyra spoke again. Very well, she said. We will grant your species a small territory on the outer rim of the galaxy, far from our core worlds where you can do no harm to established civilizations. You may have 3 systems to start with if you can prove yourselves worthy. Over the next century, we may consider expanding your territory. Jiwan felt a mix of relief and disappointment. 3 systems was almost nothing compared to the vast territories controlled by the major species, but it was a start. It was more than many people on Earth had expected. Thank you, he said, bowing deeply. The people of Earth will not disappoint you. We shall see, said Counselor Thyron. But understand this, human, your species will be watched closely. Any sign of the violence or chaos that marked your early history and your privileges will be revoked immediately. The other delegates began to disperse, returning to their own business. The audience was over. Jiwan had achieved his goal, but he felt more like he had been given a prison sentence than a welcome to the galactic community. As he walked through the corridors of the council station, Jiwan passed groups of alien beings who stopped their conversations to stare at him. Some looked curious, others looked disgusted, a few looked afraid, none looked friendly. He reached his quarters and sat down heavily on the simple human furniture that had been provided. The room was small and plain compared to the elaborate quarters given to other species delegates. It was another reminder of humanity's place in the galactic hierarchy. Jiwan activated his communication device and sent a message back to Earth. Mission accomplished, he said. We have been accepted into the galactic community. Terms are not ideal, but it is a beginning. The real work starts now. He didn't mention the looks of disgust or the dismissive comments. He didn't talk about how the aliens had made it clear that humans were barely tolerated. He focused on the positive because he knew that Earth needed hope. As he sat alone in his quarters looking out at the stars that humanity would now call home, Jiwan couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made a deal with beings who would never see them as equals. The galaxy was vast and beautiful, but it was also cold and unwelcoming. The aliens had given humanity a chance, but they had also made it clear that it was charity, not respect. They saw humans as primitive children who needed to be watched and controlled. They had no idea what humanity was truly capable of. That would be their first mistake. 5 years had passed since the Galactic Preservation Act, and the galaxy looked nothing like the ordered civilization it had once been. The council chambers were mostly empty now because there was no longer a functioning government to govern the great halls that had once echoed with the voices of thousands of delegates, now hosted only emergency meetings of desperate survivors. Counselor Zephyra sat alone in what remained of her office on the Altari homeworld. The beautiful crystal walls were cracked and dark because the power systems could no longer maintain their glow. She held a datapad in her trembling hands, reading the latest reports from across the galaxy. Every number told the same story. Total collapse. Industrial output had fallen to less than 30% of pre-crisis levels. Agricultural production had collapsed on hundreds of worlds. The transportation networks that connected distant star systems were failing as maintenance crews disappeared and replacement Parts ran out. The civilization that had taken millions of years to build was crumbling in just a few decades. Dr. Jinsu Ru worked quietly in the archives of the Great Library on Altara Prime. He was officially researching historical trade patterns. But his real mission was to document the complete collapse of galactic society. His findings would be transmitted to the human fleet commanders, providing them with a final record of what their departure had accomplished. The social fabric of alien society was coming apart at the seams. The Altari, who had always prided themselves on logical thinking and rational solutions, were experiencing mass panic attacks. Their inability to solve problems without human creativity had shattered their confidence in their own abilities. We built our entire identity around our supposed superiority, confessed former science director Velanara to her remaining colleagues. We convinced ourselves that we were the advanced beings guiding primitive humans toward enlightenment. Now we discover that we were the primitive ones all along. The Vorthak faced an even worse psychological crisis. They had always been the most arrogant of the alien species, believing their crystalline forms and vast computational abilities made them superior to all other life. But computational power meant nothing without the wisdom to use it effectively. The humans were not just workers. Counselor Thyron admitted to his fellow Vorthak leaders they were the problem solvers, the innovators, the ones who made our civilization actually function. We treated them like servants, but they were actually the masters. The revelation was devastating. The Vorthak had spent centuries believing they were the galaxy's greatest thinkers. Now they realized they could not solve even simple problems without human guidance. Their crystal minds could process vast amounts of data, but they could not make the creative connections that led to real solutions. The Nebulan faced the most immediate physical crisis. Their gas mining operations had been completely shut down for 3 years, leaving their fleets stranded and their economy in ruins. They had tried to develop new extraction techniques, but their gas form physiology made it impossible to work in the environments where humans had thrived. Captain Veltana of the former Nebulan merchant fleet lived in a refugee camp on a barren moon. Her ship had been abandoned when the fuel ran out and no replacement was available. She and thousands of other Nebulan were now dependent on charity from other species who were facing their own shortages. But the most shocking discovery came from the military sector. The pirate coalitions that had once been minor threats had evolved into organized fleets capable of challenging the major powers. They were using tactics and strategies that seemed far beyond their capabilities. Admiral Kexthara studied the battle reports from her command bunker. The pirates were coordinating complex multi-system attacks that required sophisticated planning and communication. Their ships moved with precision that suggested professional military training they learned from watching us. She realized with growing horror. For 50 years they observed human military operations and absorbed every lesson. Now they are using our own knowledge against us. The irony was crushing. The aliens had used humans to fight their battles for so long that they had forgotten how to defend themselves. Now their former enemies were using human tactics to destroy them, while the humans themselves were safely beyond reach. Archaeological teams investigating abandoned human facilities discovered evidence that made the crisis even worse. The aliens had been taking credit for technological advances that were actually human innovations. They had stolen the glory for discoveries that humans had made quietly and without recognition. We rewrote history, admitted database administrator Velanara as she reviewed the original records. We could not accept that a younger species was outperforming us, so we altered the historical accounts to make ourselves look like the primary contributors to galactic progress. The great database of galactic knowledge had been systematically edited to minimize human contributions, but the backup records stored in human-operated facilities told a different story. Humans had been responsible for breakthrough discoveries in physics, medicine, engineering, and dozens of other fields. The psychological impact was devastating. The alien species had built their entire sense of self-worth around their supposed superiority to humanity. They had convinced themselves that they were ancient wise civilizations guiding primitive humans toward enlightenment. Everything we believed about ourselves was a lie, said former Counselor Taisa to the handful of Altari leaders who remained. We were not the teachers. We were not the advanced civilization. We were dependent children. being cared for by patient adults. The revelation explained so much about human behavior over the decades. The quiet competence, the willingness to take on dangerous assignments, the lack of complaint about unfair treatment. The humans had been planning their departure from the very beginning. Evidence emerged of the massive deception that had enabled the human exodus. The cargo ships had been colony vessels in disguise. The mining operations had been resource-gathering missions. The research projects had been technology acquisition programs. They spent 50 years preparing to leave us, said Intelligence Director Velmara. While we treated them as expendable labor, they were building the infrastructure for an independent civilization. They smiled and cooperated while secretly planning our destruction, but it was not destruction. It was abandonment. The humans had not attacked or sabotaged alien civilization. They had simply removed themselves from it. The collapse was happening because the aliens could not function without human support. The Council called for a final vote on the Emergency Human Recovery Initiative. The plan would offer unlimited concessions in exchange for human return, full citizenship, equal representation, shared control of galactic resources, anything humanity wanted, but the debate revealed how completely the aliens had lost their way. They could not agree on what terms to offer. Some wanted to apologize and admit their mistakes. Others insisted on maintaining their dignity while negotiating. A few even suggested using force to compel human return. We cannot negotiate from a position of weakness, argued the few remaining Vorthek leaders. If we admit complete dependence on humanity, we will never regain our status as equals. What status? Demanded the Altari representatives. What equality? Our civilization is dying while we debate meaningless points of pride. The humans are thriving in their new home while we starve in the ruins of our arrogance. The argument continued for days while their worlds continued to fail. Supply shortages were becoming critical. Infrastructure was breaking down faster than it could be repaired. The alien populations were beginning to migrate from failing colonies, creating massive refugee crises. Daru completed his final report documenting the total collapse of galactic civilization. His data showed that the alien species had perhaps 10 years before their remaining technology failed completely. After that, they would be reduced to pre-spaceflight levels of development. The transmission was sent to the human fleet along with a final message. The last humans in alien space were preparing to depart. Their observation mission was complete. The galaxy was beyond saving. As his evacuation ship lifted off from Altara Prime, Dr. Ru looked down at the planet that had once been the center of galactic government. The great cities were dark now. The spaceports were empty. The crystal towers that had reached toward the stars were crumbling into dust. The aliens had finally understood what they had lost, but understanding had come far too late. Humanity was gone, and the galaxy was paying the ultimate price for 50 years of arrogance, prejudice, and willful blindness. The age of alien dominance was ending in darkness and silence.